In our gospel today, Jesus heals a man who is both deaf and dumb. He does so by touching the man's ears and even his tongue. This is how Jesus works with us so very often when he heals us, giving us very personal attention. But how can today's gospel affect us? How can Jesus today touch our ears and even our tongues? Have you all wondered how the 7 deadly sins ever came about, how they came to be? Well, once the sacrament of reconciliation, confession, went from being a public event to private, one-on-one meeting, the priests began to see patterns when it came to what people were confessing. Of course, they could not talk about individual sins, because that would, of course, be breaking the seal of confession, but they noticed in a general way that there were some sins which seemed to come up quite often. These were compiled into what became known as the 7 deadly sins. Well, 2 of those 7 deadly sins are still very much frequently confessed: anger, and the ability to properly control anger, but also lust. But there is another sin that did not make the top 7, but one, if they made the list today, I guarantee would be right up there, near the top. That's a sin of gossip. That's why Jesus wants to touch our ears and our mouths with his healing power, because gossip is a sin that affects pretty much every single one of us. Now, in all seriousness, I could give you a couple of hours when it comes to the topic of gossip, okay? I mean, I hear this all the time in the confessional, right? But instead, I'm going to give you a few practical pointers. But first, let's set things up. There is no love of God without love of neighbor. And there is no true love of neighbor without honoring them. Honor simply means to acknowledge the good or the value of a person. That doesn't mean you have to like them. But part of how we are to love one another, that is what we have to do, is to honor one another. Gossip, in all forms it takes, is a sin against honor. For example, there's a form of gossip that is omission, which is withholding honor due to someone. This is where we know that someone that we don't like has done something good, something commendable, but because we don't like that person, we can't bear to say anything nice about them. Or there are a whole bunch of ways that we can sin by gossiping through commission, which is an action, of course, done on purpose. Like, for example, there's a taking away of someone's honor by insulting them to their face. Taking someone's honor in this manner is exactly the same as if you have robbed that person. There's taunting of others, who might have a moral or a physical defect. There's detraction, which is the smearing or the taking away of another's good name unjustly. But instead of face-to-face, it's done behind their back. This too is just like a theft. You've stolen away that person's honor. There's defamation. That's the revealing of someone's faults with no justification for it at all. There's also something called calumny. That means you make up lies about a person to take away their reputation. If it's done orally, that's slander. Done written word, that's libel. But then there's all the ridicule and rash judgment that we give others, holding them up to our standards and not to God's. And do you ever notice? Our standards are more times harsher than God's. All these things can fall into the general sin of gossip. St. Anthony the Abbot, he once said, "It's better to live with serpents and scorpions than to live with a whisperer." He, of course, was talking about somebody who gossips. St. Ephraim, he says, "We give death entry into our souls through the opening of our ears." Archbishop Fulton Sheen once said, "We cannot gossip without either overrating ourselves or underrating our neighbor, or frequently doing both." There's St. Ignatius, who brings the hammer upon us, and he was good at that. He said what? "Nothing should be said to lessen the good name of another or to complain about him, because if I reveal the hidden mortal sin of another, I sin mortally. And if I reveal the hidden venial sin, well, then I sin venially." In his defect, I manifest mine. But here's the thing, and there's just no getting around it. People drive us crazy, right? Sometimes they just make us nuts. People do bad things to us. They hurt us sometimes. Are we simply just going to let those things go? To keep those things inside? Well, no. But how can we get the anger, the frustration, the pain out of our hearts and souls? Well, we should always be offering to God whatever might be weighing us down, especially anger, especially those things that cause us to be very upset. But as practically all of you know, sometimes it feels pretty good to vent, pretty good to dump in front of somebody else the grief that somebody else has given to you. So, what do we do to stay sane, to keep our heart pure, but at the same time stay out of sin? Okay, here's something very, very basic. If you receive some information from a person, and a third person comes up to you, if that third person has a right to that information, it's not gossip. It's not. But if that third person does not have a right to that juicy piece of information, well, then that's a sin. It's just that simple. But keep in mind with that general principle, remembering this, family issues hardly ever is gossip. Because family members do have a right to know what other family members are doing. However, you have to be charitable and not be biting and tearing apart if you are to share something. So that leads right into the next point. If you have to dump, if you have to vent, always do so in a spirit of charity. Because if you set out to tear down, to ridicule, if you have hateful thoughts of the person you're talking about, yeah, you're in grave danger of sinning. There's no question about it. For example, let's say your boss changed your hours. The hours you have to work on the night, you have tickets for the big game. Now you could take this route in talking about your boss. Man, I can't believe that idiot, man. I'm like the best doggone worker he's got, and this is how he treats me? You must be smoking crack, man. In fact, I better not see him outside of work, or God knows I'm going to do that guy. Okay, that's one approach you could take, all right? But here's another approach. You know, I am upset because I was really looking forward to going to the game, but you know, I am one of his best workers. Maybe he didn't have any other choice. Maybe he trusts me to get the job done. Yeah, it's a bummer, but I'll just have to make the best of it. Simple charity can go a long way, as can simple humility and even resignation. Now, I know that a whole lot of you are in the position, because you're great people, that others put their trust in you. And so for many of you, you are the one that others come to dump on. You're the one they call up to spill their guts to. So what can you do? Okay, first, if the person who calls you wants to talk about someone that you can't stand, you have to tell that person, hey, I don't want to know. I don't want to know. It will only get me upset. As tempting as it might be, and it is tempting, oftentimes we know ahead of time that hearing gossip about another person, especially someone we don't like, is going to get us upset. Well, don't go there. Just don't go there. Secondly, if it's something of a serious matter, and the other person really needs to tell you something about another, well, then you have to tell that person, okay, I'll listen, but I don't want to know any names. You see, you have to protect yourself, and you have to protect the honor of the other person. Third, and this one's important, this happens to many of you all the time. Someone calls you up, usually right before the TV show you've been waiting all week to watch. Okay, that's usually when they call you, right? And for the next hour and a half, they're spilling their guts, okay? Well, when you hang up there, okay, they feel all better. They got all that junk off their chest, but you feel all beaten up. It's like, whoa, what happened here? Well, a lot of the things that others tell us are indeed full of emotional and even spiritual poison, darkness. You don't want to carry any of that, not even for a minute. So here's what you do. So much of what others tell us are great opportunities for prayer. Yes, it's a little bit more work, but that's okay. Pray for all of the people involved in what you had heard. And part of your prayer should be like this: God, I thank you that for whatever reason you had me be the one who could listen to the problems of your son or daughter. But I don't want to carry any of this stuff. So offer all this up to you in exchange for your great graces to come down upon all of those involved. Then you did your job, and you're free. It won't be pulling you down anymore. Because for some of you, I bet you for many of you, it's a gift that God has given to you to have the ability to be a good listener, be compassionate, sympathetic with others, one who can take the burden off of somebody else. But don't let that gift become a curse. You pass on any and all of those burdens over to God. But the bottom line, though, is this: what somebody does, their actions, or in spiritual terms, their fruits, those are indeed subject to judgment. Those are things you can talk about, but only if you do so in a spirit of charity and truth. If you can't be charitable, if you can't be truthful, well then don't talk at all. But why people do the things they do, what is in their heart, what is in their mind, what is their motives, we have no business messing with that at all. That is between them and God. And so even though I barely scratched the surface here of a very complex problem of gossip, I'll leave you with these two thoughts. St. Teresa of Avila once said, "Don't be curious about matters that don't concern you. Never speak of them, and don't talk about them." But the wonderful saying to saying very clearly is very simple. If it doesn't concern you, it doesn't concern you. And finally, from St. Paul's letter to the Ephesians in chapter 5, never let evil talk pass your lips. Say only the good things men need to hear, things that will really help them. Do nothing to sadden the Holy Spirit, with whom you were sealed against the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitter words, slander, and malice of every kind. And in place of these, be kind to one another, compassionate, and mutually forgiving, just as God has forgiven you in Christ.